Good morning, good afternoon, good evening, whenever you might be watching this. It's good to have you here on the That Movie Is Ours Now podcast, episode 11. My name is David Sugarman. If it's your first time here, thanks for stopping by. Rate, subscribe, like, review, comment, all of that good stuff. Help people find the podcast. And if you're coming back, the same message to you, but it also is really, really good to see you again. And I really think you're going to like this week's guest, which is Amanda Friedeman from the Illinois Holocaust Museum and Education Center. We are speaking to Amanda because later this year it will officially be the 30th anniversary of Steven Spielberg's, if not his best, at least in my opinion, his most important work, and that is Schindler's List. We have a really exciting conversation with Amanda lined up that I'm just going to get through this intro and share with you very quickly about the importance of Schindler's List and how, while film is not perfect in terms of the medium should not be an end-all be-all for your education, it is a really good entry point, especially for people who might not be as educated or naturally gravitate to a subject matter, especially one like the Holocaust and genocide. Naturally, that Schindler's List is a fantastic film and a really fantastic entry point. Entry point being the key phrase. And if you want to go further, well, that's why we're talking to Amanda Friedeman as well, because the Illinois Holocaust Museum is doing some absolutely jaw-dropping work with a VR film experience right now. They have films coming up that are going into the Venice Film Festival. So these are films that aren't just educational, but they are high quality, they are moving. We have clips from trailers and from behind the scenes things that the museum, behind the scenes videos, the museum was kind enough to share with me. And some of the technology at work here will just blow you away, and the way it is being utilized is so fantastic. Before we dive in, I just wanted to share a couple things. I think if a certain struggle isn't in your bubble, it is, or doesn't immediately affect you, it is really easy to dismiss it or just not pay attention to it. I think that is really natural. And so I want to put some stats that I looked up. These are all from the Anti-Defamation League's website to bring up why Schindler's List and why talking about these things are still important. In 2022, so this past year, there were 3,697 anti-Semitic incidents in the U.S. Those consist of harassment, vandalism, and assault. That's a 36% increase from 2021. That's over a third up from 2021. It is the highest on record since 1979. I say 1979 because that's when the ADL started tracking these types of stats. In 2013, 10 years ago, there were 751 recorded anti-Semitic incidents in the U.S. Last year, there were almost 4,000. We are moving in the wrong direction. And the first step for anybody is just a little bit of education. I believe in all facets that if we were all like 3% more educated about everything, we would be in a lot better place. And this is an extremely important subject, whether you feel your life is directly affected by this or not. Amanda will have so much information, and admittedly, this is a heavy episode, obviously, but I think it is extremely important. And I do think, funny as the word is, I do think you'll enjoy it because we'll talk about the wonder that is Schindler's List and how incredible it is. And again, also seeing all this fantastic new technology in the VR film experience at work. Let's not waste any more time. Amanda Friedeman, episode 11 of That Movie Is Ours Now, coming up right now. You're that spider guy.
Spider bed.
Huh?
Of Spider Bad.
You want answers! I want the truth! You can't handle the truth!
Life moves pretty fast. You don't stop and look around once in a while,
You could miss it.
And here she is, Amanda Friedeman, the Associate Director of Education at the Illinois Holocaust Museum. Amanda, thanks so much for joining the podcast today.
Happy to be here.
So let's just dive right in. Officially, the 30th anniversary of Schindler's List will be December 15th, so we're coming up on it. I think it's important to distinct that sometimes just because something is important doesn't necessarily mean it's good. Schindler's List, what do you think made it not just this this landmark film that has stood the test of time, but something that what made it both, I guess, in your mind?
That's a great question. It's it's hard to go wrong when Steven Spielberg is telling your story. I mean, he made a really compelling film. It's not always telling the entire story. There's a lot more to Oskar Schindler than what we see in the film. He's a much more complicated human. But from a pure Hollywood narrative, telling an amazing story and getting people interested in the larger story and in the historical context, it was unquestionably one of the most important films of the later part of the 20th century. It got regular people who don't have a personal connection to the Holocaust talking about it and interested in it and thinking about the importance of learning about this history. And so from that standpoint, it was unquestionably a success. And hopefully people do then take the time to learn more about not only Schindler, the incredibly complicated person, but also the hundreds of thousands of survivors that we still have living in our communities and who have incredible stories to tell in their own rights.
I was gonna say, as time goes on, I think the number is now there's less than 50,000 survivors of the Holocaust left in the U.S., which sounds like a big number, but it's really not. So as time goes on, and unfortunately those numbers inevitably get lower, how much more important does a film like Schindler's List become, as those people no longer have a voice to tell their story?
Yeah. There is increasing urgency in finding ways to tell survivors' stories when they can't speak for themselves. That is something that in the Holocaust education world we have been grappling with for a very long time. And the rest of the world is starting to notice that this has a real urgency. A movie like Schindler's List is a great entry point. It's a great way to get people kind of a first exposure and to get them interested in the story. But watching a movie isn't necessarily the most effective way to truly learn a personal narrative. And so at Illinois Holocaust Museum, we have spent the last decade at least exploring other ways that we can use engaging storytelling, use technology, use interactive formats to help our visitors to learn the incredible stories of the survivors from the Chicago area and from the Midwest more broadly.
Yeah, I want to dive all the way in on the amazing things you guys are doing with your VR film experience, because even just seeing the trailers and clips that you guys have on your YouTube page and on your website, I couldn't even find the words, because in the moment, even these short clips were sort of touching a nerve. I think the last point I'd ask, when I watched Schindler's List, one of the biggest takeaways that I have is that in any form of mass genocide or any just even larger struggle, you need someone else to care about your fight, right? Was not going to be enough for Jewish people who didn't have the power to care about their fight. In this story, enter Oskar Schindler. How do you apply that today? I'm someone who was somewhat educated. I'm Jewish. I went to Hebrew school and got an education. There are lots of people who have no reason or feel they have no reason to learn about this stuff. So how do we get other people to care about, quote, our struggle?
Yeah, that's another great question. One of the most powerful lessons that the Holocaust can teach us is that no one who survived without help. Everyone who survived had someone in either directly in their life or someone they encountered by chance or what have you, who made a choice, who did something that contributed to that person's ability to survive. Which means that in our lives, we encounter people who need help, who need something. And very often we have the power to make a choice, to do something that's going to help them. It doesn't necessarily have to be something dramatic. Small actions can have incredible ripple effects that we don't anticipate. And so we have to be paying attention and looking out for those opportunities. And we need to get involved. We need to care. When we see, when we see refugees arriving in our communities from around the world, make a donation, volunteer, help them out. When we see, something happening on social media, or there's whether it's anti-Semitic content or racism, or we see memes going around, say something, object, let people know this isn't okay. It's if nobody speaks up, nothing changes. And if the lessons of the Holocaust can teach us one thing, that's the thing that we actually on a practical level can act on any day that we choose to.
Yeah, and you made a lot of good points there, and I think the thing that struck me is it's one of those things. Whenever you see a powerful film and you finished it, and you're first off, if it moves you so much, especially that final scene with all of the quote Schindler Jews coming to the grave site, and you almost turn it off in a joking manner, and you were like, well, thank God that was the end of anti-Semitism. Thank God that's a thing of the past.
Right.
And
we
then
wish, right?
And then you quickly come back to reality. Why is that film still so relevant, or maybe more relevant, as I'm sure just looking at some statistics from the Anti-Defamation League. I'll leave a graphic instead of going through all of these, but you'll see if you're watching this, numbers unfortunately are only going up in many of the major categories.
Yeah. Anti-Semitism existed long before the Holocaust, and it did not end with the Holocaust. We know this. There is no easy fix, or we would have found it by now. But that doesn't mean that we can't have an impact. We can't do the right thing, speak out, call attention to the memes, to the language, to the graffiti that we are seeing happening in schools, whatever it might be. Whether it's anti-Semitism or other kind of interconnected bias and hate issues, they spread and they expand when we do nothing, when we allow it to happen. Objecting, taking a stand, speaking out is not the only step, but it is the essential first step that any of us can participate in.
Well, let's transition into all of the wonderful work you guys are doing with your VR film experiences over at the museum. I know you have an exhibit now. You have a couple getting ready to premiere coming up in the fall, but give us a general overview. I think people have an understanding of what VR is, but what is your VR film experiences, and what are the goals that you're trying to accomplish with this series?
Yeah. So we have for several years, we have had virtual reality films of our survivors' stories that visitors to the museum can experience. We started with 2 survivors who take visitors on a journey through their experience in the Holocaust, going back to their hometown, back to the sites of their childhoods, and then following them through their experience during the Holocaust and into the present. This is an immersive 360-degree experience. And so you put on the goggles and can actually look around, and it feels like you are in that place. with the survivor. We have spent the last year and a half or so working with an incredible production company based in London called East City Films to make 3 new films of additional survivors. And these are, our first 2 are spectacular. These new ones are absolutely blowing my mind. They're so good. And we know that the majority of our visitors are unlikely to have the opportunity to travel to the places where the Holocaust happened. We are so incredibly fortunate to still have a large survivor community in the Chicago area, but there's a difference between the people and the places. And these films are an opportunity for our visitors to actually go to the places with the survivors who were there. And it's they're absolutely incredible. The first film to debut at the museum, which is playing right now in the month of August, is called Walk to Westerbork. It features the story of a Dutch survivor named Rodi Glass. And so you actually begin in her hometown in Amsterdam. We were able to take her into the store that her grandfather had owned, which had been a leather goods shop, now is a comic shop. And so it's quite a contrast. Her childhood apartment where she lived with her parents, and then through their journey through multiple concentration camps during the Holocaust. We also have a film that'll premiere at the museum in September called Escape to Shanghai, featuring a German survivor named Doris Vogel, who at the age of 4 was able to escape from Berlin with her mother and travel and find refuge in Shanghai in China. So a very different kind of Holocaust experience from what people are used to hearing. And then in October, we are incredibly excited to debut Letters from Drancy, which is a film telling the story of survivor Marion Deichmann, who was born in Germany, but spent her childhood in Paris and was a hidden child in Normandy in France during the war. And I'm so excited to share that Marion's film, Letters from Drancy, will have its world premiere at the Venice Film Festival in a couple weeks. So we are incredibly excited. She cannot wait. She loves Venice. And so Marion will be there for the premiere of her film. And these are all incredible films, and they are all worthy of the attention they're getting. But to get that kind of recognition for a survivor story is a really important kind of feather in the cap of these films.
Yeah, and absolutely.
That's a strange metaphor I just used, but you know what I meant.
No, I think it worked. It's always one of those things where, you watch something like this and it's so powerful and sometimes heart-wrenching. It's always funny to say, I enjoyed it. But even in watching the short clips and trailers that, you guys have online, it's not just the story itself, which is powerful, the technology at work, it is also incredible. And so to be at the Venice Film Festival, absolutely, you guys are so deserving. I wanted to ask, obviously you talked like Schindler's List. Film is a really good medium to drag people who might not necessarily, want to or be naturally interested in learning to learn. Why VR though? Why virtual reality versus making another really good short film or recreation of a normal narrative? What made you guys say VR was the way to go?
Traditional film, as we've seen so many examples, can be incredibly compelling. But ultimately, watching a film is a passive experience. You're watching something that was created for you to experience in a certain way. And there is a lot of power in that. But in VR, the viewer is actually participating in the experience. You have the opportunity and really the necessity of actually looking around, spinning your chair, looking in 360 at your surroundings, how you as the viewer navigate that space impacts your experience of the story, what you're seeing, what you're focusing on as the scene is unfolding. And we know from decades of research into educational practice and educational theory that participatory learning is more memorable and gets ingrained deeper into our brains. And so when we participate in our learning rather than passively learning, we actually learn more thoroughly and with a more lasting impact. And so film is a wonderful starting point, but it's a very different experience. And so we wanted to engage our visitors and the viewers of these films as deeply as possible.
How did these ideas come to be in terms of walk me through the execution? Because this was not, one of you guys going out and shooting something on your phone. I mean, I'm going to play some of the behind the scenes stuff that you guys sent me, and the technology at work is incredible. You're also not only asking someone who is not an actor per se to carry a story and open up a lot of trauma. I mean, there's a lot of moving parts here. How did these begin to come to fruition and actually come together once the idea you thought you might have something there?
Yeah. It was even though we got through it fairly quickly, we worked through this process on a pretty tight timeline, but it was an incredibly complicated undertaking. The first part of it really was just choosing the production company that we would work with. We spoke with a number of different VR and immersive storytelling production companies, and East City Films really stood out to us because they believe deeply in telling stories with a purpose, stories that have a larger message, stories that speak to social justice, to different types of engagement of their audience. It's not just a story to them. And that was something that we also believe very strongly in. So right off the bat, we had the best possible partners for this undertaking. Then the next step is choosing the survivors. Whose stories are we going to tell? And it very quickly became clear that Rhodey and Doris and Marion were the ones for this round. They're all very experienced at telling their stories. They speak frequently to school groups and to other audiences and have for years. So they have a comfort level in telling their stories, even with as difficult as it is. And they had stories that were very different from each other and that were focusing on aspects of Holocaust history that don't always get told. There is, I think, a perception among the public that Holocaust survivors were all in Auschwitz. And Marion and Rhodey and Doris prove that there are so many different ways to be a survivor. These are all stories grounded in the Western European experience, which is very different from the Eastern European experience. They're all women's stories, which are different inherently from the experiences of men in many ways. There just was a richness and a diversity within their stories that we wanted to embrace through these films. Once we met with the production team and the production team met with the survivors and got to know their stories, and we went through the storyboarding process and kind of mapped out what these would look like, then each of the survivors did a lengthy filmed interview telling their story in great detail, answering particular questions to get pieces of the story that then could be used in voiceover or as narration within the final film to kind of capture content. Then the filming actually started. And
Filming hasn't even started.
Right, we haven't even gotten to the filming yet. And so each of the survivors was filmed on location in the places where their story happened. The only exception was that because of COVID, we did not send Doris to Shanghai. We didn't want them to go on lockdown and have poor Doris be stranded in Shanghai again. So a combination of the production crew from East City Films, a local crew on site in Amsterdam, in Paris, in Berlin, in Normandy, and then a member of our staff was also there. I was lucky enough to go with Rhodey and with Marion for their filming, and a colleague of mine was in Berlin with Doris. And so in a lot of ways, it's just like any other film shoot. There's a lot of repetitive takes and a lot of time setting up equipment. And in this case, because the films happen in 360, there's also a lot of finding places to hide where you won't be in the shot, but you're close enough to hear what's going on. So that was an interesting experience. I spent a lot of time ducking behind trees and mailboxes and things. But once that filming is finished, then actually the real work starts, because with virtual reality, the post-production is an enormous undertaking. Blending together the different shots, the different camera angles, digitally removing when somebody didn't actually get entirely out of the shot, but you don't want to see them, or you don't want to see that truck that drove through or something. There's also a lot of, there's extensive use of animation in the films to recreate scenes that the survivor can tell us about, but we don't have documentation of. There are no photos from a particular instance in their experience. And so blending all of those elements is a huge, huge process. And then you get to, once it's basically finished, then you have to actually get the film to work with the computer system and the VR goggles and all of the refinement of the delivery. It's not just popping a DVD into a player and hitting play. It's an incredibly detailed process that we have made it to the other side of, and we can't wait for everybody to see our films.
To say so many moving parts that is so hard to even, not to make a VR pun, but wrap your head around, I guess.
Yeah.
What was it like the first time you know, I don't know if you put on the goggles the very first time they said, hey, it's done, or we think it's done. What was that like?
Yeah, of these films, the first rough cut that I saw was Rhodey's. And, you know, the animation was literally stick figures. And, you know, it didn't have the background music and it wasn't totally refined, but the meat was there. The story was told. I was there. I know the story. You know, I helped to create the script. Like, I knew what was going to happen. And by the end of the film, I was in tears, because it was so powerful and it was so beautiful. And I've known Rhodey for about 13 years now. She's a very dear friend, and her driving force in life is to tell the story of the Jews of the Netherlands. And it is a story that does not get told to the degree that she would wish, and that I think the story deserves. And so this was an incredibly painful experience for her to have to relive and to create this film. But it was just knowing how important it is for her to know that this story will always be told, and that people will always be able to learn from her experience. And even in its preliminary rough form, seeing that was just amazing. And I'm just so excited for her.
Someone comes to the museum and they watch, whether it be Rhodey's film or one of the others, what would you hope that their biggest takeaway might be from going through this VR film experience?
I hope that they come away with two things. I hope they feel like they have gotten to know the survivor, and not just as a survivor, but as a person. And I hope that they have a sense of the incredible strength and courage and resilience of these women. They were so young when these horrific things were happening to them, and they have grown up to be the most delightful and warm and loving and caring people. And it blows my mind that human beings are capable of that.
I just wanted to give you a moment if you needed it.
I'm good. I do this all day. I'm good.
Fair enough. Maybe I think I might have needed a moment there.
Yeah.
I think to round things out, I think sometimes, again, it's in the grand scheme of things, right? Everyone's focused on their own problems naturally in the world, even just day to day, right? Everyone's just trying to pay bills and get by. So it's hard to focus, especially if maybe you're not Jewish or know someone who is, on the bigger picture fights. What would you tell people in terms of an elevator pitch, if you will, about maybe the state of where things are today in terms of anti-Semitism, and unfortunately, of course, feels like it's always ever present. Unfortunately, whether Holocaust, downplaying or outright denial. What would you tell people about where the state of that is today in 2023, as you guys are making these films, and 30 years after we talked about Schindler's List?
I think the sort of the bad news is that there is unquestionably more visible anti-Semitism, more visible Holocaust distortion and denial happening. It's not necessarily that there's more happening, but it's more visible because of social media, because of our media structure, where it's much more in our faces. And that then leads to, unfortunately, violence and vandalism and things that happen outside of the online world. The good news is that we also have more access and ability to combat it than we ever have before. And so the bottom line is, things don't change unless people make a decision to make that happen. And so there are far more people who are opposed to these ideas and these actions than support them. And the people who are doing bad things are often very organized and can find each other and can rally together. The rest of us need to do the same. We need to take the time, make the effort, and not just wait for someone else to fix it.
Like we said towards the top, just to echo what Amanda said and what we talked about earlier, ultimately you need somebody else to care about your story, about your fight. And so, I think I don't have anything else to add. This was incredible. Amanda, thank you for taking so much time. Before I let you go, where can people find out about the current VR films, ones that are upcoming? And if they're not in the Illinois, Chicago area, maybe what are some good resources to donate to, or maybe just to research and trying to educate themselves a little bit? Because if everyone was 3% more educated, right, we'd be in a better spot. So where are some good places to find you guys and just other reliable information?
Absolutely. A great place to start is either on our website, which is ilholocaustmuseum.org, or on our social media, which is at IMEC, IHMEC. And we'd love anybody who's in the Chicago area, come see us. For other resources, people just looking online, I think a great place to start is the USC Shoah Visual History Foundation. It's actually, it's a part of the University of Southern California, excuse me, and it is an archive of thousands and thousands of survivor testimonies from the Holocaust, from other genocides, and expanding into other social justice atrocities, and it's now part of USC, but it was actually founded by Steven Spielberg because the experience of making Schindler's List demonstrated for him the importance of recording and preserving survivor testimony and making it accessible for educational purposes. So I think that's a great place to start and very appropriate to our conversation.
Yeah, absolutely. It's one of the best parts about film, where it's something historical and powerful,
Mhm.
or something, you know, lighter and
Mhm.
silly, is that long after someone's gone, they can be here with us on film. And I don't know that there's any more important story to continue to tell than the story
Absolutely.
of the Holocaust and the story of survivors. Amanda, thank you so much for coming on. This is fantastic. Um, just thank you so
Yeah,
much for all that you do, and I'm gonna definitely make some time soon to come by and visit the museum. Thank you.
great. Please do. Thanks so much for having me.